we can't approve the minutes, so.
Okay, I'd like to call the July 14th Board and Advisory meeting to order. First on the agenda is the public comments, questions, and from the public related to topics not part of the meeting agenda, but are related to the authority, responsibility of the Board and Advisory. Anyone has anything? I'm not seeing anything. Sec B on the agenda, approval of the minutes.
Minutes as they are being presented. Thank you, Chair, and members of the board. Or as they are in your packet, are there any edits or modifications or suggestions on those that anyone has at this time?
Jim, you'll have to wait until next meeting to approve those.
Chad is on his way. That makes a difference.
Yeah.
He is on his way.
Yes.
You'll have to wait until actually we have the member to vote on the minutes as well.
Well, then we'll move forward to the next item.
Okay. The International Board, or International Building Code Subcommittee final reports and discussion, recommendations and approval.
Well, before we get started on that particular item, staff is pleased to announce our new staff member, which is behind me. Debbie Peterson, she will be replacing Kelly, and she will be our Building Advisory Board meeting coordinator. So make her feel welcome, and in just a short period of time, I'm sure she will be keeping us on the straight and narrow as far as our meeting agenda and finding the name tags and other things of which we take for granted every day. Our staff report for this building, this is actually the IBC subcommittee final report. And this is what we were going to request action on today, which we will not be able to do so until one other member arrives. But I will go through the International Building Code, and this final report is going to be presented to the Building Advisory Board. As we continue to move forward with this code adoption process, we are presenting this final draft. This particular final draft is going to reflect all of the subcommittee recommendations. All of the time spent is going to be reflected in that, show these recommendations. And it is going to be brought to the board's consideration and discussions for that are within the text of this final draft. All of this is going to be brought forth for the boards to consider and discuss this evening. And again, we will appreciate from the board to move forward with this final draft in our next code adoption process, or to carry this forth to the City Commission as part of the packet for the code adoption process. And we'll come back to this item. What this is, the adoption of the International Building Code. As we look at this first page, we're basically just reflecting amendments in and of themselves. It's impossible to not have amendments to the code for the simple reason that each jurisdiction is different in the way they do governing, in the way that the governing body works. So what the first few sections of the International Building Code reflects upon is administrative type items that are going to be an amendment regardless of where one goes to enforce the body of codes. Regardless of what jurisdiction, everyone's going to have these amendments. What you'll see here is now we're referring to the 2012 edition as opposed to 26. That's going to be our change. And to include Appendix H. On Section 8.3, these are the reference codes. And again, this is the reason this is an amendment, and it remains an amendment. These change with each code cycle as to the proper reference codes. For the International Code, uniform code, whichever code is adopted by the jurisdiction, this is where we put in that information so that someone looking at the Salina Municipal Code or on our website and they find our municipal code, they can easily see which codes we are going to be enforcing. In this particular case, it will be for gas, the Uniform Plumbing Code, Chapter 12. Mechanical is the Uniform Mechanical Code. Plumbing, the Uniform Plumbing Code. Property maintenance is the Salina Municipal Code, Chapter 31. Fire prevention, International Fire Code. And energy, International Energy Conservation Code, and the amendments thereof. Electrical will be the provisions of the National Electric Code, NFPA 70. Those will be the code bodies that will be part of the adoption package that will be presented to the City Commission as well with the applicable years. So we're looking at a 2012 code body. So all of these will be the 2012 edition with the exception of electrical, which is typically 1 year behind. It'll be the 2011 edition as opposed to 2012. And again, these amendments that we're seeing now that we're going to keep as amendments are to the administrative section of the code. Whenever you see a section beginning with 10, those are administrative sections of the code. Anytime you see the word delete, from here throughout the body of the International Building Code, that means that we have had much discussion about it. And the reason that you see this as a deletion oftentimes is for the simple reason that it is the exact same code language as the 2012 edition of the International Building Code. As such, it's not an amendment at that point, it's merely repetition. So you'll see that quite often as well. Something else that we will see is anything to do with the permit records, the fees, those are typically deleted in the amendment for the simple reason those are referenced in the Salina Municipal Code in a separate area to address all of our permit fees. This is one item we wanted to clear up. This is Section 7. Actually, it used to be Section 8-8. It will become 8-7. You'll see this throughout this code text or throughout the text of this presentation that anytime you see red, it's basically reflecting the most current information or current text of the 2012 code. Section numbers are changed merely because the section number changed either in the municipal code because of the deletion of an item, we have to change those section numbers around. Or you'll also see throughout here this what is being amended, such as the section number of the International Building Code will be modified to reflect the proper section in the 2012 edition as opposed to the 2006. This area is identifying the work which is exempt from permit. Most of this stayed with our current amendment as it was written. However, it did expand in the 2012 edition and where we see the electrical, gas, mechanical, etc. These areas were not included in the 2006 edition. The 2012 edition of the International Building Code expanded much more on clearly defining work which is not, or work which is exempt from the permit requirements. So now we identify electrical components, gas components, mechanical components, plumbing components, and it really helps to clarify as to anyone looking at the Salina Municipal Code as to what does require a permit, what does not require a permit. The next section, emergency repairs, we kept this and modified it to clarify previously this amendment, and it was an amendment previously, and will continue to be an amendment, but we wanted to clarify that in an emergency situation, oftentimes, due to Murphy's Law or whatever, these incidents happen on a weekend. Your water heater goes out on the weekend. It goes out on a holiday. Well, if the city offices are not open, well, then you can't immediately come in and obtain a permit. So we wanted to clarify it would be the next working business day. For instance, if it happened on a Sunday and a holiday is on a Monday, it would be Tuesday when the individual would come in to obtain that permit to do the emergency repairs, and that would be acceptable. And the code now clearly defines that. It used to be the next day. Well, the next day may not always be a possibility if it's on a Saturday and the next day is a Sunday, or a holiday is interfering with that schedule. So this is more clearly defined. Repairs, we are clearly defined what is defined as repairs, what we define now as public service agencies. One item that was added in this, it was recommended as well by the subcommittee, we needed to define expiration of permit. The code texts throughout history have always referenced 180 days. 180 days, 6 months. That we are expanding upon that to also identify when work is what we shall constitute suspension, abandonment of work, those type things. If it's been over 90 days or more since an inspection was called in or since an activity on that project, we can then at that point declare that particular project or that particular permit abandoned or suspended without waiting for the 180 days. Basically, some activity needs to be ongoing to assure us that this permit is going to be closed out. And we made this very clear in this section. And this is a new amendment that will be to our Salina Municipal Code. These next few sections that you see are merely building permit valuations. Those type of things did not change because we already have an established fee schedule. You will see merely just section numbers that are changing to reflect the appropriate section number of the building code, as I mentioned before. Previously, section 8-11 was deleted. We are now going to be enforcing components of the Energy Conservation Code. As such, our energy efficiency inspections will be based upon the International Energy Conservation Code as well, or excuse me, International Energy Conservation Code, yes, and it's entirely on the commercial side of the sector will be the enforcing authority on this. And we wanted to make this reference clear to someone looking at the amendment. The next few items, you'll see there are very few changes. Clarification is on more so than anything else on section 8-12.2. Parking services is just opposed to just saying floor services. It's now a way it's going to be identified. Item number 3 on the exception was an addition in the 2012 code, so we included it in our amendment as well to make sure we're referencing the appropriate standards. Our next item is another one that you see is deleted, and basically the reason for this, the 2012 edition of the code for the first time has consolidated all definitions, every definition, into Chapter 2. You no longer have to go to various portions or various sections of the code and find definitions as applicable to that section or that chapter of the code. And by consolidating all this, the definitions you see here were consolidated as well, and they're included in Chapter 2. As such, this is now repetition. These other requirements are the exact same. Some section numbers have changed to clarify the appropriate section numbers in the codes. Section 8-12.4.1, as it relates to the floor surface, again, this is just to clarify, more clearly define what the floor surfaces are. Text from the 2012, and it also includes an exception in the 2012 that we wanted to reference in this amendment for future use as it relates to aircraft hangars, of which we have quite a few in our jurisdiction. These next few sections, if it begins with a section 9.0 or Chapter 9 of the International Building Code, these are fire-related preventions as it relates to fire alarm, fire sprinklers, those type things. To keep note, anything we need to understand as well, too, that the State Fire Marshal's Office is in the process of adopting a new code as well. They're going with the 2012 edition. They're going to have very, very few amendments. However, the International Fire Code is one of the bodies of code that they will be adopted along with the International Building Code. Typically, the State Fire Marshal's Office will amend out several chapters and reference NFPA standards as it applies to the International Fire Code. The International Building Code, they modify very little and they keep virtually as written. So any amendment to the International Building Code 2012 edition, any amendment to the International Fire Code 2012 edition are subject to submittal to the State Fire Marshal's Office for their review and their approval as well. You're going to see that many of these sections have now been amended. We are going to be enforcing the 2012 International Building Code as written, and these sections directly reflect the International Fire Code as well, whereas it's the same language in both codes, building and fire. We had much discussion on this in our subcommittee meetings, and you'll see many of these amendments have now been deleted, and the provisions of the fire code and the provisions of the building code will be enforced as written. Here's one of our exceptions, though, that we had much discussion on, is to keep the Group A grouping in here, and it's to reflect the 2012 text more so than anything else, so we could be more current with this. And it would also be easier in our next code change cycles for anything changing in a Group A. Group A being assembly. And that's basically all it is, some text changes, but keeping most of the body of the code as it was written. This next item, which will now become section 8- or will become, once adopted by the City Commission, 8-12.5. Amendments to section 903.2.8.7. This specific one we are taking to the State Fire Marshal's Office for their review and approval. Being that this is the last requirement, that is what was required, or what is specified in the 2012 edition of International Building Code and the International Residential Code. The 2012 International Code on both fire and building are specific. All buildings having having 3 or more units are to be fire sprinkled. They took all exceptions out. Basically, if it's more than a duplex, if it's more than a townhome, it will be fire sprinkled as far as the text of the body of the code. This amendment allows our detached R2 buildings having 4. Previously, our text had 6 units or less, where such buildings do not have basements, so we're looking at slabs, and are not more than 1 story in height, and providing they do not exceed 5,000 square feet. And each one of the dwelling units are separated by no less than a 1-hour fire-resistant construction. So this amendment would allow, if approved by the State Fire Marshal's Office and the City Commission, the ability to construct 4 dwelling units without them being required to be sprinkled, slab on grade, not exceeding 5,000 square feet, and a fire separation, of course, between each unit. This one we will be presenting as a package to the State Fire Marshal's Office for their review and approval. Myself and the Fire Marshal, we're in the process of completing that paperwork to submit that as soon as we can, so we can get the results back as soon as we can, or whether they recommend something else or they're going to not approve. The odds are probably good as a jurisdiction that they may allow this one exception, because previous history already indicates to us that they allowed 6 at one time, okay, in a previous code edition, because the previous amendment would have had to gone to the state fire marshal's office as well for review and approval. So that's one to keep in mind, that will be going to the state fire marshal's office, in addition to our requirements here and our submission to the city commission. The 812.5.1, we are keeping this because, in essence, the 2012 International Building Code or the 2012 International Fire Code do not specifically designate what is termed a self-service storage facility, so it's beneficial to us to keep this amendment intact. And a group S2, we are identifying again just reflective language to more coincide with the requirements of the 2012 International Building Code. The remainder of these, as you'll see we're going through, has been deleted. We will be enforcing the code as written without these amendments. And much discussion went into this, especially on these particular sections, whereas they directly reflect the exact text of the International Fire Code as well. And we will be revisiting this when we do our subcommittee meetings and we bring the fire code back to the Building Advisory Board for review and consideration. As you see, we deleted quite a few sections. So suffice it to say, the 2012 amendments, or the amendments to the Salina Municipal Code, it's based upon the 2012 International Building Code, will be a much more streamlined version than it has been previously. Elevation changes here at 8-12.6. This is just more clarification language from the 2012 so that it addresses our amendment in the 2012's current edition as opposed to the antiquated 2006. Areas without fixed seating. This is one we had much discussion on as well. And what this is doing is allowing, and the 2012 specifically allows this now, it wasn't in previous editions, to allow the building official to establish a function based on a listed function that most resembles the intended function of the space, and when the table is unclear or the table cannot definitively give us an answer as to what classification this space may fall under. The building official now has the discretion to make that determination. Again, these other items are merely to clarify and update to the 2012 text, to better define the exact requirements. Some other items that you'll see in here, and we're starting to get to that point now, is we're looking at riser height and tread depth. No longer in the code, and this has been back and forth since the year, since 2000. With each and every code cycle, which is every 3 years, it's becoming apparent that we struggle with the symbols for inch and feet. We struggle with the terminology for inch and feet, and it goes back and forth between code cycles. So for the 2012 edition, we would not be referencing anything with a symbol, feet, symbol inch. As such, we cannot confuse that with minutes or seconds or whatever. So you'll see that a lot of these changes, especially in this section, is referencing the feet and inches and putting it in text as opposed to symbols. Many of the amendments, we kept those as is, and we referenced the 2012 edition to allow for exceptions that were not previously there. But most of the, it's either narrative, for instance, you know, the next exception, we can see handrails for aisle stairs. Previously, it was just aisle stairs. We're just expanding upon it to reflect the 2012 language, more clearly define what we're speaking of. That and clarifying that we're not using symbols. It will be feet, it will be inches in the text, or whatever the case may be. And you'll see this on and on throughout the text. One thing I do want you to note, Section 8-12.6.12 is an amendment to Section 1013.7 of the International Building Code. We added to this, we changed the text, the number because it will reflect the section number of the 2012. In addition to that, we did only one comment at the end of this. We expanded upon the requirements for this. The guards remain guards. The distances have changed in the 2012 text, and we reflected that item. And we also included, not that it is a, this isn't a code requirement, it's not in the code to add this, but this is indeed an OSHA requirement, and we felt it necessary to reflect it at this point and to put it in our amendment so that we're sure that this is done. Whenever these enclosures, these guards are located within 3 feet of a roof edge, and we're talking about those that are going around equipment on the roof, whether it be a rooftop unit or whatever the case may be, that we're now going to require those to have toe boards. And this is to help prevent objects from falling off the roof during the maintenance operation, where it's very, very easy when you're 3 feet away from the roof for someone to accidentally kick the wrench or whatever it may be and it falls 3 stories. It's a projectile at that point and it could easily injure someone. So we will be requiring the toe boards for these applications. Section 8-13, of course, this will remain an amendment, whereas we always reflect the ADA standards of which is enforced by the jurisdiction. And in our case, again, it's 2010 ADA standards for accessible design is what will be enforced for the accessibility issues and requirements. And again, on our Chapter 13, whether it was the 2006 edition, whether it was the 2009, whatever edition, Chapter 13 is merely energy efficiency in the International Building Code. It merely refers you to the International Energy Conservation Code. Chapter 13 in the International Building Code is all of 1 page, and that's all it is going to reference you to is those requirements. In a subsequent meeting, and the reasons it's noted here, we are establishing, and we will be establishing, new amendments for the Salina Municipal Code. This will be an entirely new section, of which is not in place now, to address the Energy Conservation Code. It will be the Salina Municipal Code, Chapter 8, Article 1, Division 6, adoption of the International Energy Code with amendments will be the governing authority for the energy efficiency requirements within this jurisdiction. That will be in a subsequent subcommittee meeting, many discussions on that before we get it into the amended or work through all the amendments, being that this is a brand new section of the code. There'll be much discussion in this before we finalize it and it's brought forth to the City Commission along with the other code bodies. This next item is merely repetition. That's the reason it was deleted. It's referring to the exact same text along with Section 8.18 and others that follow. The next items here is Section 1703. There's quite a bit of discussion was involved in this particular item, whereas this was our special inspections. Chapter 17 is special inspections in the International Building Code. There was a tremendous amount of amendments in this section in our current amended Salina Municipal Code. Amended for various reasons, amended for some controversy, amended for other reasons or beyond the scope of what the code requirements were indicating. At any rate, we have went through this very, very thoroughly. And Chapter 17 will now be revised as you see written. It will reflect the fact that reports and those type things for special inspections, it won't just be, say, on the front end, we would require a statement of special inspections would identify the special inspections that would be required for that specific project. We also require at the end a final inspection letter saying that those special inspections have been performed and met. In addition to that, we will now, the building official will be furnished with all of the special inspection reports that coincide with that as a method of, or as required by the code for us to do our efficient record keeping to have a complete construction document for that project. So the concrete testing reports, for example, those type things will be coming to us as well as they are performed. The structural steel inspections, the inspection reports along with the statement of special inspections and the final inspection report will be a complete work that will be submitted to us now for us to complete our record and as required by Chapter 17 of the code as a complete documentation of the special inspections for that project. And that was the biggest change in this. And effectively now for the school projects that we have ongoing, this has already taken place. I'm receiving many reports now, concrete reports, et cetera, for our school projects. So it's already working without necessarily being approved by the city commission at this point. So staff is very pleased at that. We are the record keeper in essence. Special inspections for fabricators, we are keeping this in, and we expanded upon it a little bit as it relates to fabricators doing special fabrication or assemblies for our commercial projects. The depth of footings, we wanted to reference probably the only amended section other than to clarify a text from the 2012 International Building Code and to have that text in within the amendment itself. We're wanting to specifically identify our frost depth. As we mentioned in an international residential code, we feel that the frost depth of this jurisdiction should be 36 inches, and we're going to reflect the same to make sure it's shown on the International Building Code side as well, so there's no confusion. Our frost depth is 36 inches on both bodies of the code. Previous text, previous amendments had it at 30 inches, and everyone is already constructing to the 36-inch depth that I'm aware of at this point anyway, which mostly correlates with our climate zone 4 in the area we are in the United States. We should be at 36 inches anyway, according to the tables. Another big one to note. Previously, section 8-23. We enforce the Uniform Plumbing Code, 2006 edition presently. We'll be going through the amendments and code cycle for the 2006 to 2012 extensive changes to those codes along with the amendments for the International Plumbing Code. Our amendment previously utilized Table 2902.1 of the International Building Code to establish fixture counts. We will now, this section will be deleted to reflect the proper section of the Uniform Plumbing Code and the appropriate table 422.1 as being the authority for fixture counts. Now, when we bring this back, being that we have another subcommittee meeting regarding the Uniform Plumbing Code, and we've not yet started those, there'll be much discussion there as to how that table may be modified. But it will be the table that we use. Basically, we won't be using a table within the building code to determine our plumbing fixture counts. We'll be using a table in the Uniform Plumbing Code to determine our fixture counts, specifically Table 422.1 as amended, or as it will be amended, as we have further discussions on that item. But we're taking that reference out of the building code. Our Appendix G is, as it applies to residential swimming pools. The only thing we changed, we kept this exactly as we had it because it is serving our community very well, as it reflects to our above ground or in-ground pools, is the section numbers and or whether it be the section number for the municipal code or the section number for the section itself that it's amending from the building code, we're just reflecting that language. On section 8-26, we're looking at accessibility for existing buildings. Again, we are going to reference the appropriate ADAG and standards that we're enforcing now, as opposed to Chapter 11 for the accessibility requirements. Section H 101.2 signs. We have a specific sign code in our zoning regulations that is applicable to all signs. As such, we're not utilizing the sign regulations as written in H- or H101.2. Those are not changing, so we're going to keep those as amendments within the proper section of text that they belong in. These next section that you see, 8-30, is amended simply because it's repetition, it's exact language of the 2012. And a little more information about the signage. We are going to reference now NFPA 70 as the for the electrical requirements for all signage. It was previously stated the National Electric Code. 2012 edition states NFPA 70. They are one of the same. It's just a matter of semantics at this point. And that concludes the International Building Code. Many, many hours went into this, much discussion for us to come up with this finalized version that we're bringing forth to the board to make a decision on. And this will be the version which will be going forth to the City Commission as part of the packet. As we've mentioned before, we're going to submit everything to the City Commission at once. It's going to be the International Residential Code, the Building Code, the Fire Code, the Uniform Plumbing Code, the Uniform Mechanical Code, and the International Energy Conservation Code, all as one packet for the City Commission's consideration. But we still have quite a bit of work to do as it relates to the Uniform Plumbing Code, the International Fire Code, and the International Energy Conservation Code before we complete that mission. So still quite a bit of work to do, and we've accomplished quite a bit of work. So as we go back to our report now, these are the following options that staff has identified for the board's consideration for this afternoon. And I just wanted to approve a motion to direct staff to move forward with this code adoption process to include 2012 IBC, the International Building Code, with the Salina Municipal Code amendments as was presented to you this afternoon. 2, approve a motion to direct staff to provide specified additional information or take specified additional action before making a decision. Or 3, other action as the board deems appropriate. And we would request at this time that actually staff is going to recommend option number 1, and we will turn it over to the chairman at this point.
Does the board have any questions for staff?
I have one question, back on page 4,
Okay, just a second.
the very top of the page, number 6. Sidewalks and driveways, it doesn't really make any sense, not more than 30 inches above grade. These are things that are exempt
Exempt from a permit.
permit. So sidewalks and driveways are totally exempt. This doesn't make any sense to me.
Typically,
I think
when we're
maybe-
doing residential inspections or whatever the case may be, we're not typically inspecting the sidewalks in and of itself. Things that are within the right-of-way are going to have a right-of-way permit, those type of things to our engineering department. The building code does not specifically inspect driveways and/or sidewalks.
Okay.
The reason, now if it's 30 inches above grade, you've gotten to a structural issue there because there's something underneath that. For some reason, that's going to have structural
Well, I think
modifications.
I think that went with platforms and uncovered decks. I think we could strike everything from platforms on through the end, down through below.
So to retain the platforms and then covered decks?
No, you're not going to have a sidewalk or a driveway more than 30 inches, nor is it going to be over a basement. I think those definitions went along with platforms and uncovered decks.
As opposed to sidewalks and driveways.
Right.
So we need to strike through sidewalks and driveways and keep platforms and uncovered decks, to clarify.
Well, are we wanting platforms and uncovered decks to not require a permit? And I know we talked about that at some length.
Decks that are more than 30 inches above grade require a permit as it is.
Right.
Yeah.
So sidewalk, we just need to unstrike everything.
There was a lot of discussion on this during the residential section.
Right.
And it was about decks that were connected to the structure. I mean, there was some kind of terminology about the deck being connected to the structure. And but this definitely doesn't make sense the way it is written here. But I wasn't in on this particular discussion, so I'm not sure where it was.
Staff will do research on this one then on item 6. And I'll reference our notes that we had on our International Residential Code Subcommittee meeting, see if we have some parallel confirmation as to clarify this specifically as to what the requirement is. And if it's part of an accessible route, it's going to be required, permit's going to be required anyway. That's one of the clarifications of the 2012 edition for the International Building Code. That part I'm sure of.
But that relates to sidewalks and driveways.
If it's part of an accessible route, it could. I'll check our IRC notes. for this one item number 6 and bring back to you a clarification on that point at our next meeting. Any other?
What is a sidewalk or driveway that's not part of an accessible route? Is that something that's behind a building that's not connected to the?
Right, it
parking
would be
lot or
your,
something?
like your service areas, your service vehicles, those type things. They're providing access to that building,
But not for the public
not for the
use?
general public.
It's just saying it's not required for a permit, but doesn't say it's not under a code, does it?
Or it's still in the
Oh,
code.
okay.
Right. Any and all of these items does not exempt one from the requirements of the code body itself. You know, just like item 11, say, for instance, even though it's exempt from permit, one would hope the manufacturers constructed and engineered these things to a code standard where our children are not injured.
Okay, you'll check that out.
I will. I'll check that out, verify that. come
Any
back.
other questions?
Make sure we have correlating language between the two code bodies.
With that exception in mind, I would move that we approve option number 1.
We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed. Next item on the agenda. It's other business and announcements. We need to go back to approval of minutes.
That's where we just went.
Right.
Item B, approval of minutes.
We, do we have a motion to approve the minutes? We have a motion to approve, second?
Second.
We have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion approved. Now we'll go to item D, other business and announcements.
Thank you, Chair, members of the board. What we're looking at is our future agenda topics here, and as I mentioned, there are several more subcommittees to come forth, as in we have the International Fire Code to go through. We have, prior to that, as part of our Uniform Mechanical and Uniform Plumbing Code, we have to finish those up as well. Also established a subcommittee for the National Electric Code, and then a subcommittee for the International Energy Conservation Code. So there's still a tremendous amount of work for us to do and many more code meetings and subcommittee meetings to complete this mission so that we present a complete package to the City Commission for their approval and adoption of a new code cycle. Again, we have 2 openings for members, and if we know of anyone that could be interested, please have them fill out an expression of interest forms. And as it relates to that, our last meeting we referenced, it was the last meeting or the meeting before, expirations of terms that are coming up in August, and we're determining Mr. Mars, his term is up, and he has served 2 terms. As such, he cannot reapply for the board without remaining off the board for at least 1 year. Then he can reapply. Those others with 2 years, 2-year terms that are being served that are coming up, Mr. Prester, Mr. Bixby, Mr. Palmatier, and Mr. Zucker. Being that these are your second terms and August 31st terms will expire, you will be ineligible to serve on the board again without, again, a year's absence, and then you can reapply to serve on the board. So staff would appreciate very much anyone that you can recommend or have someone to please fill in an expression of interest form to apply for your vacant position so that we can fill these as expeditiously as possible. And that's all I have for our other business.
Okay, we don't need to recommend anybody for the subcommittees. I mean, we got the subcommittees going right now.
The subcommittees are
Don't we
going right now, so we don't need to recommend anyone at this
Right.
point. It's just a topic that we need to keep in the back of our mind that we will be going forth with additional subcommittees, so.
need- Okay. Okay. There's no other, nothing else. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.